Hello, and welcome to a special, immediately post-election edition of the Corolosophy podcast. I'm Chris Muntz. I'm your host, and this is going to be a little bit of a different episode, and I'm really excited for you to hear this conversation. But I decided to publish this right after the 2020 election and right before we start to think about joining our families for Thanksgiving for some probably tough conversations for many of us. At least I hope you're still planning to have the tough conversations at Thanksgiving, because that means you haven't written your family off due to some type of political disagreement. But ultimately, we're going to be in this place for the next few weeks. So this episode's going to come out right after the election. I'm recording this before I know the results, which, of course, as we all know, we might not know the results for a little while. But I'm recording this before I watch the election night coverage so that I can truly tell you that regardless of how this turns out, this conversation on this show and the conversations that I have with my family and the conversations that I have with my friends, I will be doing everything that I can do to make sure that those are quality and productive conversations. As so many of the edicts and so many of the precepts and the concepts that we've discussed on this show is that not everyone knows everything, that no one has from their point of view can look into the world through their eyes, through their senses, and experience all that is true. We need each other for that. We need even people who see things as completely insanely different than we do. We need those conversations because they might help us come across a blind spot. So this episode's going to be a little shorter on the intro, just as a special edition of this really fun conversation with Angel Eduardo. Before we get there, though, I just wanted to remind you that CorolosophyCon 2021 is still happening in Atlanta in April 9 through 11. You can find a link in the show notes for that event, and you can sign up and make your reservation. It's really low cost, but going to be a very high quality, small and safe professional development opportunity for you. This podcast is entirely listener supported. In other words, if you do not choose to interact with the content or leave comments, share episodes to save me the advertising dollars, or go to Patreon and support for as little as $3 a month, or choose to use the promo code for any of the sponsors on this show, I don't make a dollar. So any amount of help that you can give helps continue the mission of this show and to keep it going forever until I can pass on the mic to someone else because I'm too old to talk. That's always the dream. So thank you so much for doing that in any way that you're able to help. And as always, this show is supported at Patreon, patreon.com/Corolosophy. There's so many awesome people up over there that are just because they enjoy the content and they enjoy chipping in to help underwrite the costs of this show, are doing that of their own free will, which is just an amazing thing about the information economy, you might say. This show is free, but people can choose to support because they know it takes a lot of time for me and it takes a lot of money for me to be able to put together this stuff, and they want to be able to help. We also have a producer level over there. The show is produced on Patreon by Ulrika Igrein, Munoz Alarcon, David Kowalczyk, James Mock, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. With no further ado, we're going to jump right in to my conversation about how to have better conversations, especially when they are the kind that you dread. And this conversation with Angel Eduardo is a joy, so stick around. Okay, everybody, I'm here with Angel Eduardo, who is a writer, and trigger warning out there, everyone, not a choir person. And so so I thought I'd tell everybody a little bit about what we're going to do here and where I came across Angel. I found Angel on Twitter. And as many of you know, I've talked a lot about my fun little pastime, which is to get on Twitter and just have conversations. I have always felt like it's a better app for conversation than Facebook is. And so recently came across Angel and really been impressed. And then come to find out Angel is a writer, and I'll let him tell us a little bit more about that. But I've been really impressed with some of the ideas that he's been putting out on Twitter. So Angel, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Good. Well, I appreciate you joining. And why don't we just start out with you telling us a little bit about who you are, kind of your origin story. I see that you're a musician, but that's not why I asked you on the show, but I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit at some point. Who are you?
Who am I? Writer, musician. I guess musician is an imprecise term, I think. I play music. I play guitar and I sing, and I've been in bands, and I've written songs, but that's not something that necessarily makes me a musician. I think Yo-Yo Ma is a musician, in my opinion. I would say that I play music, and so colloquially, I would just say I'm a musician. Yeah, but getting into it, I think.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of the music educators that listen to this show would say, no, that you are a musician.
Uh,
Whether you think of it as your profession slash pastime slash hobby, we like to think of you as a musician. So welcome to the club.
no, well, thank you. But yeah, I've been just a creative person since I could remember. It's all I've ever wanted to do is just tell stories and create. And I found multiple avenues for that. Photography, writing, basically anything that I had any facility with. I tried to develop as much as possible, just because sometimes an idea is better as a song. Sometimes an idea is better as a poem or a piece of fiction. Anything remotely creative that I had any kind of connection to, I tried to go in there. I'm a very poor illustrator. I wish I was better at it. I've always wanted to draw comic books, but
Now,
just
is that your artwork behind you on the wall there?
no. I wish it was. It's my fiance's work. She's
Oh, okay.
she's much better at it than I am.
Oh, okay. That's great. That's great. So where in the world are you talking to us from right now?
I am in Queens, New York City.
Okay. Okay. Great. Great. So many of us, of course, are caught up in this world of conversation, and as we all know, especially during the pandemic, but even the years leading up to it, more and more online. And of course, it's almost famously cliche at this point how low the quality of interaction and conversation on most online platforms is, and having conversations seems to just get harder and harder. And one of the things that I of yours, like I mentioned, you also have done some writing, and you've published in where Aereo, Idealist, where else can we find your writing?
Yeah, Mr. Beller's Neighborhood. I've got some pieces there. Aereo more recently, and I'm actually a staff writer at idealist.org. I do a bunch of stuff there. They're a nonprofit focused on nonprofit jobs, mainly a nonprofit job board and a career advice blog and all sorts of stuff like that, but also activism and encouraging good deeds and good work in the world and connecting people, moving from intention to action is the big selling point. We want to get people who want to make the world a better place and put them in with places and people and institutions that have that same goal and will facilitate that.
Oh, that's
Um,
really cool. That's really cool. I'd never heard of it until I came across your writing, and so I've been clicking around on it a little bit the last little bit. So that's really
yeah,
neat. Everybody should go check that out. Of course, the article that I came across that you had written, and it was back in July, but I just came across it on Twitter this last week. The 3 tips for having difficult conversations, and I want to talk with you a little bit about that because, of course, Thanksgiving's coming up, and that's another cliche is that Thanksgiving happens, families get together, politics bust out, conversations get busted out, and then you've got these arguments, and then you've got Uncle Tim who leaves in a huff and he never comes back, and we don't see Uncle Tim for 4 years or whatever. Like that's the meme. And so what I'm wondering, first we'll dig into the weeds of your ideas because I agree with a lot of them and I think they're important. But what inspired you to write this article in the first place about tips for having better conversations?
mainly it's just noticing how difficult it really is to communicate. I mean, especially online and especially with you know explosive topics like religion and politics and all of those things. The 3 things they tell you should never be polite conversation: sex, politics, and religion. Those are the 3 things that are probably the most important things to talk about. And I think that admonishment of not talking about it to be in order to be polite has kind of metastasized into this issue where nobody knows how to talk about these things, but it turns out we have to. um,
It's
and
almost
just personally, It's just something I find very frustrating because communication is so important to me.
Mhm.
Being able to exchange ideas is something that I profoundly enjoy, and it's difficult, and it's hard to find common ground. And I see so many people falling into certain traps. And I was talking with my manager about stuff to write for the blog, and I just said, well, the thing that's foremost on my mind right now, if you asked me what would you like to do to help make the world better, I would say I would love to try to help people have better conversations. And she said, go for it. And yeah, so I dug right in. I was really excited to break it down and do the best I could. And
Yeah. So it's almost like a little bit of sarcasm here, but it's almost like we have to do a thing in order to be good at it.
yeah,
And by yeah,
amazing. Huh?
right. It's amazing how that works. And so and I agree. I've actually made that same analysis at many times over the course of my life, that by us creating this idea in our mind that we're not supposed to discuss certain things, we just we don't, because we don't want to be the one who does, like the one jackass that brings up politics at the dinner, and then everybody's mad at that person because then he dragged everyone in, or whatever. And so we've kind of avoided it. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons that I don't know, the way I am, is because my family didn't really adhere to that. So I grew up speaking about all, like, anything and everything. There were no taboo conversations in my house. We could talk about anything. In fact, we could argue for 3 hours about things that we generally agree on everything, but maybe the fringes of the argument. And we would still just argue about it because we enjoyed the discourse. And I know that not everyone's family is that way. And so maybe that's part of it. But did you have a background in your life that just maybe set you up for being more sensitive to these conversations than other people?
Yeah, well, I don't know how much more sensitive I am than anybody else, but I
Or
definitely
willing? How about willing?
willing. Yeah, for sure. I
Mhm.
think I think there was just something about my upbringing that you know I was forced to grapple with incongruities often, just because something my parents told me didn't jibe with reality, and I found myself falling on my face because of it. And so I said, well, okay, well, what's going on here? And just generally being a very inquisitive person, and generally being uh, not understanding lying. Like I think I always had a problem with dishonesty. Like I just didn't understand why somebody would say something that's not true, because it's creating all these problems. I just remember thinking, well, why did you say that? That's not true. And um, I had the reputation of being difficult because I would constantly question everything. I really didn't have a problem questioning authority,
Uh-huh.
and you know, um, I was one of those kids who got the thing from adults about, like, oh, this kid's gonna be a lawyer. So I was that kind of guy. And then growing up, I just found myself interested in ideas. I really wanted to learn from as many people as I could. I loved talking to people older than me and hearing what they had to say. And I remember, particularly in high school, we were all getting into philosophy in the weird ways that high school kids get into philosophy, not necessarily reading Plato or Nietzsche, but like watching Fight Club, and, and
Okay.
becoming obsessed with Fight Club and thinking that everything that came out of Tyler Durden's mouth was just this explosion that we just never understood any of this stuff before. And of course, he's drawing from Nietzsche and all this stuff. Um, but it was just this fascinating thing that my friends and I were absorbed in, and we would spend hours and hours outside in my backyard, just sitting in a circle, just talking about ideas, just breaking down the ethics of eating meat, or the death penalty or something like that. And I remember having that feeling of fear when something that I believed but I never actually examined. I never really thought about it. It was just something that was pre-programmed or something, was challenged. And um and having that feeling of fear juxtaposed with a kind of euphoria. Like it was so exciting. This idea, like something's happening, something is changing, and I'm witnessing it in real time. Something inside me is changing. My mind is changing based on the arguments that someone give me, about like eating meat, for example, um, or the death penalty. Actually, like they coincided because I remember, we're having cheeseburgers, and I'm telling my friend I believe life is precious, all life is precious, and I would never kill anything. They're like, "You're having a cheeseburger," and I literally just never thought about it. It's like you're 15 and you're just like you're an idiot. You don't know, and but I remember that feeling of like there's a pit in my stomach of that fight or flight kind of thing. Your ego's getting bruised because you're being told you're wrong, and you're losing, right? But at the same time, like my mind is just whirling because it's so interesting and exciting, and just the idea of transforming into a person that you weren't 5 minutes ago because you've gained some knowledge. um, that's always been something that I've loved even when I've hated it. And as I've gotten older, I've just tried to cultivate that and tried to be more and more that person who is desperately seeking, um, more information and finding out if I've been wrong about something, and then changing, and trying to take pride in being wrong in a kind of weird way, because this evolution of like, oh man, I've been wrong about that, and I've been wrong about that for such a long time. You can go two ways about that, right? You can lament the fact that your whole worldview has just been shattered, and you can lament all the time you wasted, and you can think about it that way. But you can also say, well, man, I'm glad I found out now and not 10 years from now.
Hmm.
um, and so I've tried really hard to cultivate that in myself, just this desire to ask questions and to want to be proven wrong and seek out people that I disagree with and have them explain it to me. And then I'll test my argument against them. I'll see how my logic fares.
Yeah, yeah. That's really good, and I think maybe one of the most critical points that you just outlined there, and you said it two or three times, which was that you've tried really hard to cultivate it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key, because it's not enough to just say a lot, and so because so many people do. If you ask 10 people on the street, "Hey, are you open-minded?" 10 people would say, "Yeah, totally. Yeah, I totally am." But the problem is that unless you intentionally, like in the front part of your brain where you're doing your on purpose things,
Mhm.
unless you do that intentionally on a daily basis, you probably aren't actually open minded. So for example, we think a lot about, like, this idea of sometimes, for example, people will brag, almost take pride in the fact that I haven't flip flopped in my life. I haven't said one thing and then changed my mind. I'm the same person I was when I was 25. And then I look at that person, I go, that you're bragging about that? Like, that's something that you take pride in, that you have not changed your opinion in 15 years. To me,
Right.
that's is a sign. And so one of the things I ask people to do is try to like list in your own head the five maybe most important beliefs that you hold. Like the things that if you would hold up your virtue against anybody on these five things.
Mm,
And then if you are open-minded, which of those five things could you see yourself not still believing in 10 years?
mm,
And just make people's wheels start to spin. Which of those things that I define myself with could I give up? Could I potentially be proven wrong on? Even just sometimes that first thought can get people to think in a different way. I mean, I can think of so many in my life. I've actually taught my audience has heard me talk about this a lot, but I was raised super evangelical. Gays are going to go straight to hell. Like that was what I was raised to think. There was no other thing to think when I was little. That was what we were taught every day by everyone we knew.
mm,
And it was through years of coming up against contradictions to that, meeting actual gay people, for example, that didn't seem evil, like they didn't have horns. And so when I started to see that contradiction, I started to change my belief gradually over time. And and now obviously I don't think that at all. So there's tons of that, and I think this actually ties into your article. I've got it here on the screen in front of me. It's in number one, which is to be honest and admit when you're wrong. And that seems like, and you even say it seems like an obvious thing, but for a lot of people that is really hard.
Oh yeah,
Do you do,
definitely.
you- do you come across that more? Do you come across this? I don't know, of course, how your whole life is set up and everything, but is this something you feel like you come across more online than in person?
Um, yeah, I think, I kind of get into it later in the article too, that there's an added layer to um, discourse on the internet because there's an audience, and losing face in that arena is very different than if you were just having a one-on-one conversation with somebody in your bedroom or your living room or whatever. Um, and that definitely makes things much more difficult. It's a much more intense. Um, uh, there's a much more intense response to that kind of ego bruising that I was talking about earlier.
Hmm.
Um, when it's much more humiliating to be humiliated in front of people. You can be embarrassed by yourself. You can be embarrassed with just the one person who's scolding you or schooling you or whatever. But if there's 10,000 followers and it gets retweeted and liked, and suddenly you're being thrown around like a rag doll and on the internet, you know that's completely understandable to want to avoid. So that's going to incentivize people to dig their heels in even deeper, and it makes the exchanges even more tough to go through. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I would agree, especially with the digging your heels in deeper aspect of it. When there's a performing for an audience, a component of online conversation, even in, I mean, I would even say like even in small audience type social media interactions, like just an average person with their 200 Facebook friends or whatever, even if you don't know who's looking, someone's looking, like someone that from the grocery store or whatever, or your gym is going to come by whatever it is that you said online. And then they're also going to see the person who told you that you were wrong. And so we feel this need to save face when somebody comes in and tells us so that we were wrong. And so then, of course, we're going to kick back with some kind of a witty zinger. And that way we look cool. It's almost like we, as because of social media, have not grown past third grade playground type level of discourse. Because if you think back to like playground fights when we're little, that's an audience component too. Those happen because kids want to look tough in
Right.
front of other kids. And so it's kind of a shameful thing in that it's gone that way. But of course, you and I can't solve that in this little conversation. So, I'm going to hit a couple bullet points here that you wrote. Staying wrong is always worse than admitting you're wrong, which I love. I
Mm.
love this one even more. You are not your opinions. And then finally, in this little first section, emulate the behavior you'd like to see.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration for those? Tell us a little bit more about those precepts.
Well, uh, it's kind of like what I said before. I mean, if assuming that your goal is to be as good a person as you can be, to be as learned as you can be, and to not make unnecessary mistakes, then you're going to want to be less wrong. Or you're gonna want to be wrong as little as possible, right? It's inevitable. You're gonna be wrong. There's just too much that we don't know. But if you're aiming in that direction, I mean, it's hard to argue with this idea of like, hey, imagine you could find out that you were wrong about something right now, or you can find out about it 10 years from now. Like, I think anybody would say, well, yeah, I'd like to find out right now. The problem is when you're having these kinds of conversations, you don't want that to be the case, and so you just kind of try to divert. And that leads you to the next bit, which is, you are not your opinion. It's like, you mentioned the flip flopping thing. Like, no, I'm exactly the same person I was before. I haven't changed one bit. It's like, well, it's not necessarily a good thing. Depending on what's going on, depending on what the topic is. Hopefully, you will have learned. Hopefully, you will have changed. And in the piece, I I liken it to your wardrobe. Your opinions are kind of like your wardrobe. When you're 12, you wear certain clothes and you wear them a certain way and they fit a certain way. When you're 25, you're going to be dressed slightly differently. You're going to have a better sense of what looks good on you. You're going to have a better sense of, you know, what you like and what you don't like. But you're still you. That's still you this entire time. You've changed, but there's still something essential there that hasn't gone away, right? So your opinions are similar. Like the things that you think when you're 20, if you're still thinking everything exactly the same way when you're 50, you haven't done a lot of thinking, I think.
Right.
Um, and it's important. I think it's an important tool for progress and for having successful conversations. I think is to just remember that you're still going to be you. You're still going to be okay when you wake up tomorrow morning after having been, you know, completely just browbeaten by somebody's argument. That you've just been totally wrong. You were completely shown to be like just totally off on everything that you thought. Your whole worldview has just been destroyed. Just to put it in the most catastrophic terms. Let's just say like the thing that you thought was so fundamental to who you are was just completely destroyed. You're going to wake up the next day. You're going to be different, but you're still going to be you.
Hmm.
And that fundamental part of you is still there. And so I think keeping that in mind will help when you find yourself in these positions where you feel like your sense of self is being attacked. Your very identity is being attacked somehow.
Yeah.
It's not the case, not really. Like you're
Hmm.
gonna be okay. You've been wrong before. You can remember, and you're still here now. You're fine. You still have the same name. You still have the same social security number. Everything's fine. You just think different things, but that's what your brain is for. So
Yeah.
that should be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like you hinted also at the idea of, if you're in a conversation, what is your goal? Is your goal to win the argument?
Right.
If it's something that is, especially if it's controversial slash contentious, that kind of thing, is your goal to win and make the other person kind of concede completely to you, or is your goal to exchange information and come out both better off? And those are two completely different outcomes. And that's I'm pointing it out because it's one of my favorite axioms as well, which is that not everybody knows everything. So no one person knows everything. So if you enter the conversation realizing that that also applies to you, to me, like if I enter the conversation, if I know that no one person knows everything, that includes me. And
Right.
so if I'm going to have that conversation with someone, I'm going to treat myself in that way, that I'm missing something. And then, but then you can go one level deeper than that and say, I know that I don't know everything. I might be smart or I might be well read on this topic, but I don't know everything. And then I add another layer, which is everyone knows something I don't know.
Yeah.
Everybody, because they've got a different perspective they've seen something from a different angle, even if they were stood in the same room as me our whole lives, twin siblings, they're going to know something that I don't know. And so if we kind of put those two ideas together, instead of winning the argument, it can become about what can I inject into this conversation? What can I get out of it? And then coming out of it with a different opinion in some way than I had before. And I do find that I agree completely about the online thing, because it is harder to do online, but with intentionality, it can be done. And that's kind of that's what my whole life on Twitter is like, I will not fight with you. I will not fight with you. I don't, people try, like people try,
Yeah. Same here.
but I'm not going to do it. And what that does is kind of, you mentioned in several cases in the article, of just staying calm. And can you calmly present? But then, of course, some people listening to this might, one of the retorts to that I hear a lot, is that being calm or civil in a conversation just allows people with harmful opinions to voice them. And so if you're really, um, if you really are for justice and truth and all those types of things, then you would shout down your opponent and all of that. And I find that just as harmful.
Oh, definitely. I think that bad ideas don't withstand scrutiny for very long.
Uh-huh.
So I've been in situations where there's a genuinely bad idea that I really disagree with. And you have two options. You can get extremely agitated and you could just try to shout it out of the room. You could try to shout it down, or you can poke and prod at it and see what happens. And if it's a bad idea, it's going to unravel because something about it is wrong. If there's, it's if it's a bad idea, if it's actually a bad idea, not just necessarily a different preference or something like that, then there's some faulty logic in there that you can uncover. And whether the person you're talking to agrees with you or sees it, it could still be helpful to point it out, at least for yourself. Or if there's anybody else listening, they might be, oh wow, I never thought about that.
Right.
And I think that the alternative is to try to bury things, and things never stay buried. Bad ideas, especially, never stay buried. And when you bury them, you give them like an added allure. They have this forbidden fruit kind of quality now, and the people's inherent kind of suspicion of censorship and suspicion of authority, um, especially people who are more inclined that way, they're going to dig something up and go, "Oh, they didn't want me to know this because it must be the real truth."
Right.
And now you have to deal with this kind of conspiratorial layer to it, rather than just attacking the logic itself and eliminating the idea right from the outset. You now have to deal with this whole mythology that's been built around it. It just never works. It never works. Censorship never works. Trying to smother things never works. It's easier to just let's bring it out into the open and let me just take it on.
Right.
I prefer
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah. I agree. And there's a keyboard warrior mentality
Mhm.
that when we're sitting behind a screen where, and I would just ask people who think that it's a great idea to internet dogpile on someone or shame or insult or something online. That I would ask also, what is your goal? If you are a keyboard warrior for truth and justice, like you say you are, is your goal to shame that person into leaving that online space? Or is your goal to make the world a better place by making one less person think that horribly dangerous thing that they think?
Yeah.
Because if your goal is to change a mind, you're going to have to. It's kind of like you said. You're poking and prodding. You're not going to get there by just simply saying you are an idiot. You are wrong. You're going to
Yeah.
get there through questions. You're going to
Right.
get there. You're going to get there by asking questions that they eventually can't answer because their ideas are so bad.
Right. And that
Um,
actually gets to the third bit from that first section in the article, emulating the behavior you want to see. Right.
mhm.
It's kind of sounds trite, but it's really effective. I mean, if you behave the way that you want others to behave, now there's one person doing it.
Uh-huh.
And that leading by example thing is a really powerful thing. And just it's the easiest thing in the world, I think, to apply just in many many cases. If you're wondering if something is wrong, flip it around and see what you would think if someone was doing it to you. So you obviously don't think your ideas are bad or terrible or wrong or stupid, right? You don't think you're an idiot. So if someone approached you and was responding to your idea and calling you an idiot, how would you react to that? Do you expect that conversation to be productive at all? And how would you imagine a productive conversation going? If someone were to come and question your ideas, they have the hostile route that they can take, or they can politely ask you questions honestly. Which one would you prefer? And so I feel like just extend that courtesy to everybody, because you don't know who people are until you really really dig in and get to know them. So this idea of like, oh, this guy must be an idiot because he thinks a B or C.
Yeah.
Well, you really don't know.
Right.
So
Yeah, you also talk about in kind of in depth of the idea of giving people the benefit of the doubt, and I usually phrase that as assuming that the other person is coming to the conversation in good faith until
Yeah.
you prove me wrong.
Mhm.
And I will assume that. And what would you say to the person? How would you parse out with the person who says, well, I'm not going to assume good faith because if they believe X, Y, and Z, I already know they're a bad person. So, why would I waste my time? How would you conceive of that, do you think?
A few ways, I guess. I mean, for me, I personally I don't really believe in bad people. I don't think there's such a thing. I kind of take the Socratic point of view there, where it's not so much that there are bad people, it's that there are people in the grip of bad ideas. There are people who see the world a certain way, and because they're misguided, because they're wrong, they're doing harm to themselves or others, or they're backing things that are harmful.
Hmm.
So I come at it from that perspective, where I'm engaging with somebody who's just misguided, but also, depending on the idea, it's more or less plausible in my mind. But you know, I could be the one who's wrong,
Right.
and I
Yeah,
really
that's
don't. And I
important.
really don't know
Yeah.
until I start throwing my ideas against the wall and seeing what sticks. And um, you know, obviously there are things where society has basically clinched it. Racism is bad. No one's gonna convince me that being racist is good or productive or helpful, right? That would take a cosmic level of persuasion. I think it's never going to happen, basically.
Mhm.
um but most people aren't really making those kinds of arguments. Most people aren't saying, no, trust me, you should be racist. Most people aren't having that conversation, right? Most people we're parsing things that are more nuanced and difficult, and it's easy to be on one side or the other, or the other, or the other, however many sides there are. Um and yeah, I think it's also just important to focus on the idea and not the person. So one thing that you'll notice about me if you follow me is that even if someone is kind of like what you mentioned before, even if someone is attacking me, even if someone does call me an idiot, I kind of just ignore that and I go straight to their point. So I don't engage that aspect of the interaction at all.
It's giving
Um,
them power.
yeah, in a way, and it's also it's just it's the surefire way to hijack the conversation and derail it.
Hmm.
And I just don't care about that. I really don't care. Now I'm speaking just personally. I really don't care, if someone thinks I'm an idiot. I really don't care if they're insulting me. Like I'm not insulted by insults really. Um, I care about the idea, and if the person is continuing to engage and it's not totally exhausting, I'll usually keep going and just focus on whatever the argument is and just try to break it down. And that's really difficult to do, and it can be frustrating, and it's not always successful. But I have had some really interesting encounters where the person started off super hostile, and just by kind of wearing them down with the just the consistent wave after wave of not listening to that, but just continuing to address your point. We ended up being friendly with each other and saying, oh, this was actually pretty cool, like, and then we follow each other, and it becomes this thing where if you would have seen the first exchange there's a ton of hostility, and that would have been for many people grounds for blocking, and then the conversation's over. Um, and I think that's partly because I'm actively participating in this experiment of
Hmm.
trying to have conversations with people that I disagree with, and I want to try to make it work. So I have a lot invested in making this sort of approach work, because I feel like it's a real option. The only other alternative is violence, and I definitely don't want that. I want as little of that as possible. So we're gonna have to figure out how to talk to each other,
Well,
and
right. Yeah, people.
navigating the hostility and kind of just under. Yeah.
Yeah, people underestimate that violence component, and how it relates to conversation. I think the average person doesn't see a connection, probably because we are, no matter, well, I shouldn't say no matter, in almost every place that a person grows up in the United States, we don't encounter violence on a day-to-day basis. When I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was worse in a lot of places than it is now. Um, and so we don't see it, and so we underestimate the connection there. But ultimately, if you're doing something that I don't want you to do, and I want to try to get you to not do that thing that you're doing, I only have two choices. I can convince you or I can force you. Those are my only options, or of course, or I can walk away. So we'll add that third option. But of course, if we're talking about on a societal level,
Right.
as a society, we can either talk about it until we've come to a consensus, or we can fight. And I think I agree with you. I'd prefer to not fight. Um,
Yeah.
there's something else in here that I really like, and this is one of the things that one of my favorite aspects of this concept that we're discussing, and this the idea that that a person, if you're going to really engage in one of these tough conversations, that you do the mental gymnastics, the mental work that it would take to present the best possible version of the other person's argument, the steel manning the argument, so to speak. Almost no one that I come
Right.
across is willing to do that. In almost everything that I present to anyone that doesn't agree with me, the first thing I'll get back is a straw man of my argument. So you're saying you want to kill babies, or whatever. It's like it's some kind of fantastical. It's almost like we've learned that the best way to win an argument is to make the other person look like a horrible person, and then you're more likely
Yeah.
to win. So when you say, how do you characterize your I guess your practice when it comes to steel manning someone's argument when you're talking?
It's these things all work together, right? So the first thing is just the basic assumption that you're not speaking to the devil. You are you are speaking to a human being who most likely agrees with you about, they want the world to be better, they want the world to be fair, they want people to be happy, and they don't want anyone to suffer unnecessarily, right? So that's the first thing. And that goes a long way, actually,
Hmm.
because I feel like so much of where people kick conversations off is presupposing, this villainous kind of caricature of people on the other side. So like just because people are pro-life, or I shouldn't use those politicized terms, but just because some people think that abortion is wrong, it doesn't mean that they hate you. Doesn't mean that they want to oppress you necessarily. They just have a
Hmm.
certain viewpoint, and it's a difficult topic, right? And if you're somebody who believes that abortion should be an option for women, then you know it would be wrong for them to consider you some kind of mass murdering psychopath. Like that's just the wrong place to start a conversation from. um, so there's that, and then it's the understanding that everyone is a product of their background, you know and however you want to you know twist those levels around, those dials. Um, Everyone is the product of their background. Whatever they were taught, whatever they were surrounded by, all of those things affect how they see the world and how they interact with it. And, the same way that you don't know everything and that you haven't been exposed to everything, and it's impossible for you to understand every possible perspective, they're in the same boat. And so you're just coming at it from two different perspectives. And so part of your job, if you're really going to understand each other and come to some kind of resolution, is to acknowledge that and try to find a place where you're both understanding each other. So there's that, right? Making sure that you're speaking the same language. That can be difficult because there are so many terms and phrases and things that get defined very strangely and differently, and then people are using the same word in different ways, and they think they're talking to each other but they're not. um, so it's just coming at it from a place of humility. It's saying, okay, let me make sure I understand what you're saying. So you're saying, you know, okay, let me make sure I understand what your point of view is. And there are two reasons you want to do that, right? The first is just kindness. Like you want to actually be engaging with a person. You don't want to just use them as a punching bag.
Right.
You want to make sure that they're being heard, right? But the second thing is, for your own benefit, like you want to make sure that you're not wasting time on a caricature of somebody's point of view. Like, why? What's the point of that? You're engaging with something that doesn't even exist. The straw man is a straw man because he's not a real man. Like, why would you waste your time?
Well, yeah,
So,
and I'll add to that, when you say it's for your own benefit too, if nothing else, so you don't look like an idiot in the
right,
conversation. Because if someone says, well, I believe this because XYZ, and you turn around and say, so you're saying ABC, well, then
right,
if for an onlooker, you kind of look dumb,
right,
when because they clearly didn't say that.
yeah,
And so you're inferring at that point. And I think you brought up a couple really good examples of this that I want to kind of parse this out for a second, because
sure,
you brought up the abortion example, which um, I find as to be one of the best examples of this straw manning two sides of an argument of anything that we do in political discourse. It's like clockwork.
yeah,
If you are someone who is pro-life, or basically you're anti-abortion in whatever way you want to, however you want to phrase it, the arguments around that usually are related to autonomy of the fetus or the baby as being a human with its own rights. That's usually the whether whether there's a religious reason, or whether there's some kind of a um, humanhood, a personhood attached to the fetus. But of course, then that position will get strawmanned with almost no exceptions as well. Oh, well, you just don't want to let women be in control of their own bodies. Well, so that's
right,
actually not what that person said. And then on the flip side of that, you will get the straw man for people who are pro-choice and that believe that women should be able to make those reproductive choices. It will usually be phrased by the other side as, so basically you want to kill as many babies as possible. Like you
right,
want, like, this is something you like. Is this something you enjoy? And they're like, no, no, I don't want to have that happen. It's just a sucky world and sucky things happen, and so this is a choice we need to let women make. And so neither side is having a conversation about anything, any operative issues that might cause there to be any kind of compromise possible, because they're having two completely different conversations. You could go down the list of almost any politically contentious thing, and if you actually listen to both sides with the intention to understand what they're saying, you'll see that this kind of happens all the time. And I'm sure you know this, like you see it too, which is that two different conversations are happening. You used another way of phrasing, like with word definitions, which is also a Socratic thing, by the way, of this idea of when you start the conversation, start with defining the terms. Don't go past that until both parties in the conversation has at least agreed on what it is that's even being discussed, because this happens a lot where I'll watch these conversations go back and forth online or even in person, and it becomes clear to me that, for example, racism is a perfect example of the word, just the word racism, right? There's more than one definition, and person one will start a conversation about racism, this, racism, that, and they assume their definition is the one being used by the other person, and then the other person's using a different definition, and they think that that's the sentence was nonsensical because they had a different definition of that word in their mind, but they also assume that the other person was using the definition they're using. And I've seen those conversations go 10 volleys deep before somebody even thinks to ask, well, are we even talking about the same thing? And it's clear that we're not. And so this idea of establishing the definitions first, like, say, let's talk about racism. Okay, which definition should we use?
right.
And by starting that, people are so unaccustomed to it, it freaks people out when I do that to them, because it forces them to think about the core of the conversation at least has to be the same, or we're just going to talk past each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're totally right. I think that those are two huge issues that we have to work really hard to fix if we're going to have conversations that work. The thing you pointed out about the abortion issue is absolutely right. I think, regardless of what position you take on the issue, like, I think part of the reason that it's so contentious and so difficult is because I think both sides of the argument are being dishonest in how they characterize the other.
Hmm.
And it's an impasse. We're just not going to get anywhere because, of course, no one is going to want to be called a baby killer. And no one is going to ever say, yes, I want to kill babies. Um, and if that's the way they're being portrayed, then there's no conversation to have there. And on the other side, it's like, yeah, you just want to oppress women. You want to take away women's choice to do what they want to do with their own bodies. Like that framing is also dishonest. In a lot of ways, and it's difficult, and there's a lot going on both sides of that debate. So I don't want to oversimplify it, but I do think that there is a kind of knee jerk dishonesty in the way that each side characterizes the other. And that's a huge problem. And it's not just abortion, religion, basically anything you can name, even just Democrat versus Republican, the way that they frame everything,
Hmm.
and I just, it's just easy to try to turn the opposition into something inherently evil. And I don't think that's productive. But the other thing about the definition of terms, that's something that I noticed very early on. I was an undergrad. My undergrad, I was a psychology major, and you have to take these courses for experimental psychology. Running experiments and learning about variables and independent variables and that sort of thing. And one of the things that I always carried with me was this idea of operational definitions. Every psychological paper or every scientific paper you're going to read is going to define their terms very clearly right at the beginning so that you know exactly what they mean and what they don't mean. Because otherwise, all their findings are going to make no sense. If you have a different definition for, um, whatever it is you're measuring, if you have a different definition for racism, then everything they find is going to be nonsensical to you. So they have to make it clear right up front. And I've been in conversations where we've gone for 2.5 hours before we realize, oh wait, so you're saying that socialism is this. I meant socialism like this. And then they go, oh, well, yeah, well, obviously, of course. Yeah, yeah, of course, I agree with you. So we that 2.5 hour conversation
Yep.
was based on, it's like that sitcom trope where two characters think they're talking about the same thing, and it's funny because we know that they each mean something different.
Right.
And it's just this ridiculous exchange that they're getting more and more confused, and it's that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I would say any word that ends in ism seems to fall into into that category of
Yeah,
words that you can waste 2.5 hours at Thanksgiving or whatever,
absolutely.
having a conversation, and then finally realize, and that's even if you ever do realize, because I find that most people never do, because they will leave the conversation in a huff thinking that that person was a horrible person,
Right.
or they've ever realized that you actually were just a part of a solo conversation, that there was no second party in that conversation because you were talking about two different things. It's
Yeah.
like, if I this is a classic kind of a uh, cognition or consciousness exercises, but it's that whole thing of, how do I know that the color blue looks the same to me as you see the color blue? And the whole time we're arguing about what the color blue is, and it turns out that when you see blue, you see red or whatever, right? It's like,
Right.
and so that whole time we were just talking about two completely different things, and nobody noticed it. And so that is definitely something that if we made that part of our kind of our daily practice, or every time we have a conversation, that we start out with that Socratic idea of establishing a term. Because I think, just to keep using the example of racism, um, you could even have a person who would then disagree from the outset on the validity even of one of the definitions that you're using,
Right.
and that's okay, because then at least you're having a conversation and you both know where the disagreement is.
Yeah.
So like if I put forth of a definition of something and you at that point say, oh, well, that's not a good definition. Well, then we're moving. Then we're actually having a conversation about the term and we're
Right.
both on the same page. We're both aware right away that where the disagreement is. And I think we're less likely to get into a huff when we have conversations like that, because I think a lot of the anger, a lot of besides the performative stuff we talked about earlier, comes from the frustration. It's like an exasperation. It's like, oh, and because we don't feel like we're ever going to get anywhere.
Right. Yeah. You know, part of the problem, especially online, though, is that you're getting a ton of jargon all at once. You're getting racism, but you're also getting microaggressions, and you're getting, critical race theory, and you're getting all these things that are really difficult to parse. It's a lot of stuff going on there. So I generally try to just avoid the terms completely, and I focus on whatever the behavior is or whatever the idea is.
Hmm.
So instead of trying to like relentlessly just define racism and make sure that the other person is using racism in the way that I'm using it, I'll just say, listen, this behavior is wrong. That's what I think. I think
Hmm.
when people do this, that's wrong or counterproductive, or it leads to this outcome that I think is bad. And I just show the math, and I don't worry too much about, whatever you want to define it as, whatever you want to label this thing. What I'm saying is that this thing is whatever.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I kind of have a similar idea. I don't mind using the jargon, but I would say that tell someone that I actually don't care which definition we use.
yeah,
I'd be happy to talk to you about any definition of any word. I just need to know what it is
right,
before we start, and I'll be intellectually flexible enough to have the conversation about whatever definition. Red is blue. That's fine. Let's say red is blue, and then we'll just have that conversation. But at
yeah.
least then we're both on the same page.
You
Which
reminded me actually of, I don't remember who it was. I wouldn't out them anyway, but someone tweeted something to the effect of, "Here's a real handy way to spot Nazis. If you say, if you say I hate Nazis, and they ask you define Nazi, they're a Nazi."
wow.
um, and I responded. It was a long time ago now, but I responded something to the effect of like, I mean, there are a lot. I know people who are Jewish that have been called Nazis.
Hmm.
So clearly the definition has slipped a little bit from where you seem to think it is. And that's actually become a good question to ask, just to make sure we're both talking about the same thing. Um, 'Cause, I mean, if literally a practicing Jew can be called a Nazi for something unrelated that they've said, we need to redefine our terms. We need to figure out exactly what we're talking about here. So this tack that you're taking is, you're going to find a lot of Nazis,
Yeah.
and sometimes that's kind of their goal. Don't know why, but yeah, making sure that you're actually talking about the same thing is strangely difficult and really important. Yeah, everyone should just kind of, that should be step one, as you mentioned.
Right. I do. Earlier, I said that I will assume that everyone is acting in good faith when they're talking to me. However, that does not mean that I think that everyone does.
Yeah,
And I think that you just outlined what I do see as a fairly common bad faith technique, a rhetorical technique, which is there are some people who want to set it up in such a way that there is no way for you to argue your way out of being a Nazi. Like
right,
in other words, they've thought about the trap that they're going to put you in, and they do it on purpose because they know that there's going to be a dog pile. That's the way that like again. I'll take it back to the playground. There are bullies on the playground that know that there are going to be some of their henchmen or their minions nearby who will jump on and back them up, and there's that part of that performative aspect. And so there is, I mean, some of that, but again, like I like how you phrased it as just, I'm going to focus on the behavior. That's just bullying.
right,
Like that's bullying. If you're trying to trap someone into being a Nazi, and you leave them no way to not be one, then you just bullied them.
right,
In which case, whether it's online or in person, makes no difference to me. So yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. So one of the things that I'll do before we wrap this up is first, of course, in the show notes, I'm going to put links to your all your stuff, whatever you want to share, your
Sure.
Twitter and everything. Because everybody, I highly recommend that you go find Angel on Twitter. If you're a Twitter person, it's a great person to have a conversation with. But one of the things too on the way out that I'll just highlight, go check out this article. He ends with some just short bullet points of tips to do. And as we head to our, of course, Thanksgiving dinners, I'm excited about mine because I know I will go to my family and just argue for 4 hours, but we'll be fine. We
Yeah.
will be fine. Um, so on the way out, so how would you, if you had to kind of leave us with one thought about why you think this is so important and why you focus on it, and or if you kind of thought of like one idea that people really need to remember from this conversation if they have any hope of making this better in their own life.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, the reason it's important is obviously, we touched on it earlier, but it's if you want anything to change, if you want people to do something differently, you are on a spectrum of persuasion to coercion, right? So it's going to go from a polite conversation to brute force. Those are that's the spectrum you're on. And we want to stay away from brute force as much as possible. We don't want that to be the way. It just doesn't work because you have to keep doing it to maintain the difference that you've successfully attained, if you have. And it's harder but better to change minds. And I mentioned in the article that for better or for worse, we're in this together. We built this world together. Everything that's great about it and everything that's bad about it. And the only way to make it better is communicating with each other. And getting better at communicating is the way that we do this. So, you know, I think if there was just one thing I would say, as you're going into Thanksgiving dinner, if you've got a, a super, super, super conservative Republican uncle or something, and you're on the left, and you suspect that it's going to be really painful, or if you have a family member who is devoutly religious and therefore homophobic, you're going to have these really tough conversations. But um, the main thing is just to recognize that we are all products of our upbringing. We're all products of the ideas that we were given, the in which we were raised and born. Like whatever psychology is going on in our head, all those things mix together to create who we are. And um, in a sense, very very few people are walking around saying, what awful horrible thing can I do in the world today? How can I make people as miserable as possible? Very very few people are walking around thinking that way. Most people are
Sociopaths.
saying, yeah, right,
Sociopaths do that. Yeah.
exactly, and we have a name for those people.
Hmm.
Yeah. But the vast majority of people are trying to do the right thing. They think they're doing the right thing, even when they're not. And if you come at it from that perspective, your homophobic uncle, he really thinks that it's wrong. He really thinks there's something wrong with it for whatever reason. It could just be like an insecurity. It could be religious belief. It could be a million things, but they're really behaving as though some grave injustice is happening in the world and they want to make it better. So focus on that motivation, the motivation of, I want to make the world better. There are very few people, I think what we talked about right in the beginning, very few people would disagree with the idea of like, yeah, I would like to make the world a happier, better place for everybody.
Hmm.
Most people would say, yeah, that's, so, it doesn't mean the conversation is going to be any easier. Doesn't mean you're going to convince your uncle, but having compassion and understanding where they're coming from and not being judgmental of where they're coming from, not just saying, oh, well, he's just racist or he's just a bigot or, he's backwards, he's an idiot. Just thinking to yourself instead, like, well, yeah, I mean, if I were brought up in the time that he was brought up, and if I was inculcated with the things that he was inculcated communicated with, I would think the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we work from there? What do we
Right.
do from there?
Yeah.
Compassion is the main thing.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it better myself. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking us through this. And we really appreciate it. And it's going to be, I think, a slightly less stressful Thanksgiving for all of us.
I hope so. Thank you very much for having me, man.
All right. Thank you. See you out there on Twitter.
All right.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the end of an episode. I always appreciate those of you who are the thinkers, who are the real deep listeners and get all the way to the end of a podcast. Those are the diehards right there. And I have a challenge for you as you leave this election season and you head off to your holiday break, hopefully involving some of your family. And yes, even hopefully involving some of your family that you are diametrically opposed to on something, on some political issue, some social issue, some understanding of the world that you just don't see eye to eye on. And I challenge you to think back to this conversation and try to put some of these concepts in play. It really is worth it. That's why I invest so much time in this concept, because it does make your life better. It makes you better to become a better conversationalist, to become a better listener, to become, first of all, just a person who holds at some level in their mind the possibility that they might be wrong when they're having a conversation. But here's the trick. The second of all, I guess you might say, is that you actually oftentimes can avoid being wrong more when you assume you probably are, because then you're on the lookout for those blind spots. You're not going to become immune to being wrong. I wish I could give you that in an episode. I can't. You're not going to become a perfect thinking machine. But when you hold it as a possibility that you're at the deepest core beliefs that you hold, the things that you think of as making you righteous could actually be based on things that don't make any sense at all. And it's all a lie. And that's okay, as long as you're trying to discover, you're trying to learn, you're trying to grow. So I'm passionate about this topic. I appreciate you listening. On the way out, if you enjoyed this episode, there's always things that you can do to help. Number one, like, subscribe, leave ratings, leave comments. Anytime you see something published by Coralosophy Podcast, do something to interact with it. That helps a lot. This show is entirely listener supported, which means that we don't earn anything unless you help us out. That means you go to patreon.com/Coralosophy and chip in a little bit. $3 a month gets you in the door over there or more. Or if you choose to use the promo code at either vocevista.com/Coralosophy, which is an amazing overtone analyzing software that you can use in your classroom. SightReadingFactory.com, of course, for memberships for you and your kids. Graphite Publishing and RyanMain.com for sheet music in PDF form that you can have right now and ready to sing tomorrow. And of course, MyMusicFolders.com, home of the Resonance Singer's Mask, as well as choir folders, choir robes, tons of gear that you need for your choir classroom. So head on over to those sites and check those out. Thanks a lot, everyone, and thanks for listening. And we'll hope you have a great Thanksgiving and enjoy your bunker after the election.